Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Sloppy Lab. This is Bottom of the Beaker, the weekly show about the design ducks and strategy of Keyforge. Everybody, and I mean everybody's favorite unique deck game. I'm JT Russell, and with me tonight is the man who says that when he goes to his LGS to play sealed, he brings 3,457 decks and then picks the very best one to play that evening.
I do have a tendency to open some pretty good stuff in sealed, especially at KFC last November. I
Mm-hmm.
was I was a fortunate one. I opened a good one and had some good results. So yeah, outside of sealed, I can't open good ones. So maybe there's something to your theory there.
I was going to say, I think that I categorically open better decks than you do outside of
I think
sealed.
that's true. Yes,
Outside of
that's
sealed.
objectively true. Yeah. Well, um, I'm not going to let that sway me. We have a lot of stuff to dig through tonight. I am really excited to talk about this. You sent out a lot of surveys. We got almost 100 responses. Have some very interesting data to share tonight. Not just about sealed, but kind of just about the game in general and in the player base, at least that we interact with.
Totally. So there's been a lot of talk about formats for the game. There was recently also an announcement from Ghost Galaxy about the formats for the upcoming organized play season. Um, and we were thinking prior to that, like, hey, let's send out some feelers and see where people's heads are at with regards to what they want to see playing. And then the announcement came up, and we're like, well, is this still relevant? And then the discussions about the announcements were happening. We're like, yeah, it's still relevant. let's do it. So yeah, we sent out a whole bunch of surveys that 2 days ago, a day and a half ago. So I've seen a bunch of responses so far. So awesome. Thank you so much to the folks who have done so. I'm going to leave those surveys open. I'll put a link in the show notes, like actually for real. There'll be a link in the show notes. And we'll put a link in the chat here too for the folks who are with us live in case you haven't done it already. But yeah, love to get those opinions. And it's been really interesting to dig through so far already. So far already.
Yeah, and we don't want to step on anyone else's toes because there were actually a lot of people that put out polls and surveys the last
Mm-hmm.
few days, ever since the announcement came on Friday. Did not mean to step on anyone's toes. We asked a few extra questions and we compiled a lot of the data that we're going to go through tonight. That'll be like the first half of this one tonight. We'll go through that information and data. And then the second part is really like where we started with this idea. You started with this idea of kind of looking at data and analyzing it for sealed pick one of three versus sealed alliance. And so you compiled some statistics based on random samples from DOK, and we'll look at that. It's not a perfect metric, but we're going to look at like the SAS and the ARC of that and kind of have some very surprising results that you got from that.
Yeah,
So we'll talk about
without
that in the
getting
second
into it
half.
now, I was very surprised by what we found. And yeah, well, we're just gonna let that be a teaser, tickler.
Yeah.
Uh,
Don't want to miss the second half of this one.
I don't miss the second half of this one. And yeah, welcome folks in the chat. A Zoc, a Data Force Stream, a Murph, Behawk. Why don't you come in and chat? Although, oh man, we should get Behawk in here because well, we'll talk about our own biases. Behawk would have been a good balancing presence too.
True. Maybe we don't need a balancing presence this evening, though.
Perhaps
If we
just
acknowledge
slightly.
our biases first, if we let everyone know up front where we stand, how we answered this survey, I feel like, you'll understand where we're coming from. We're not trying to hide that. But to me, there's a lot of very clear results that I got from this data. But for me personally, just to acknowledge where I'm coming from, I am definitely an Archon and traditional sealed player, and we're going to define traditional sealed for you here, like we did in the survey as well. Traditional sealed, when we say that throughout this show, we are referring to the open three decks, pick one version of sealed, as opposed to sealed alliance, which, as you all know, is open three decks, make an alliance, and then play that deck and tweak it as you want throughout the day. So when we say traditional sealed, that's what we're referring to. Me personally, I am very much a traditional sealed player. I am an Archon player. I am not an alliance fan. So I'll just get that out of the way from the start.
Yeah, no, I mean I follow that pretty similarly. Just so folks are clear. Yeah, not trying to hide it when we present any of the information here, and tried to present everything as fairly as we could, put together the experiments as fairly as we could, and I don't know. It's a really interesting topic. What folks' preferences are and why those are their preferences. And I think we could spend a whole episode just digging into where some of that comes from. I I know that for me, Keyforge is very much a lifestyle game, and as a result, or because of that, not as a result of it, but with that being my relationship to the game, I spend most of my time interacting with Keyforge when I'm not actually playing it, and that's when the distinction between alliance versus not alliance really comes into play. And we can talk about the impact on sealed for alliance versus non alliance too, which is a little bit different, but nuanced. But yeah, that's my preference. We certainly still love you and appreciate you if you are alliance's fans, but that just happens to be where our preferences lie.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. This is no shade intended at any alliance lovers like the man that just joined us in the room, the one and only B-Hawk. So yeah, no shade intended at any alliance fans out there. This is not intended to be bashing alliance or any players that like it. We are just trying to look at the information that was given to us, and there's some pretty clear indicators that I don't think B-Hawk's seen it yet.
I don't know that he has. Speaking of Beahawk, look who just walked into the lab. I have no idea if the audio levels are going to be all right, but we're keeping it sloppy. Welcome, Beahawk. Who's just adjusting your video for the folks who are with us on stream. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys?
I am great. I'm super happy that you hopped in too, because I think
Yeah,
you'll be
very much so.
a good. Well, I'm not gonna tell you for you to tell us where you fall on the preferences, formats and such.
Well, I I think I'm biased in that I think of a certain set mostly, and I think Sealed Alliance is the way to go for it. I'm speaking about Winds of Exchange,
Hmm.
but traditionally I have been a fan of traditional Sealed, where you get 3 decks and you pick one to play for the event.
Gotcha. So you think
Okay.
for Winds of Exchange particularly, it makes more sense. Um,
Yeah,
okay, that's fair. Right
yeah.
on.
We can dig into that more with some of the Sazanark stuff, because you and I talked about this a little bit earlier, and I see where you're coming from, and we can dig into that in the second half, I think.
Hmm.
Um, the first half, though, as we said, we want to kind of go through this data. And for the listeners in the podcast, we will try to illustrate this the best we can. For the people watching live on Twitch or on YouTube, you will see the pie charts that are in front of us. Um, so where do we start with this? So there were 93 responses. We had a fairly decent mix of players from different backgrounds, different areas of the world, but we still saw a pretty clear preference across everything for Archon, traditional sealed, and there was a bit more of a divide between traditional versus sealed alliance. But we, I know, as I go through this, there was not really any outliers that caught my eye. There was no stark difference between North America and the rest of the world. There was not really a stark difference between players that started in Coda and players that started in WoW. It's still kind of held up pretty close to the 2-to-1 ratio that we've been seeing lately of players in favor of traditional sealed over sealed alliance, about 2-to-1.
Yeah, and places where we've seen these. I mean, I've seen polls on the Nordic server, in the Time Shapers, Sanctimonious Time Shapers server, supposedly on the Keyforge France, the AFK server. There may have been a poll that favored alliance, sealed alliance. Smaller numbers on the poll than some of the others, but still interesting to note. And if you're listening to this, AFK folks, and you're like, yeah, sealed alliance is my jam, grab the link to the survey that we sent out and make sure that you're represented in the data we got here, because we're going to tabulate it all and put it together for folks to look through after the show too, because this has only been up for a couple days. If you happen to have seen it, then you took it. Hopefully we've got a representative sample so far, but yeah, this is what we've got. Yeah.
B-Hawk, did you get a chance to see any of this? I don't know if you had the link before the show or not.
I did not get a chance to see this. I just saw some of the Excel spreadsheet stuff after the
Okay.
fact. But
Okay.
yeah.
So to run through the rest of this, so we mentioned that there's about a 2-to-1 preference across all the respondents for sealed alliance. Sorry, for traditional sealed over sealed alliance. It was about 3/4 in favor of Archon over Sealed Alliance,
Hmm.
which, like, just when, and now, I guess for a little bit more context, the way you presented these questions was pick one of these two formats and only one of these two. And if you can only pick one, which would you prefer to play at a Vault Tour or KFC Premier event? And so that's what these responses are for. So it's 74% Archon over Sealed Alliance,
Hmm.
um, 89% of Sealed Alliance over Alliance.
Yep.
So only 11% or so liked Alliance. Uh, 52% prefer Archon over traditional Sealed. And this is a really pretty close even split, like 50-50 between traditional Sealed and Archon. Slight edge to Archon. That's the only real, like, close
Close. Yeah.
race we had here. And then real quick, just for the rest of them, 88% prefer traditional Sealed over Alliance. 95% prefer Archon over Alliance. 68% attended a Premier event last year. And so I'll stop there. There's some more like demographic questions after this, but like that's pretty much the gist of the responses, like one versus one of these formats. Um, and we can just clearly see that there's a strong preference for not Alliance formats.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, the question was sort of phrased in a way that asked, "Hey, you're going to a big event. You've got to pick one of the two events to play. Which one are you going to play?" So we're kind of getting a rank preference a little bit, but also like given the choices between these two, yeah, which is your preference? And I think that's important because a lot of the data that we sort of have so far. Um, well, one, we don't have traditional sealed data compared to as a any data any attendance data that tells us whether folks prefer going to say traditional sealed versus sealed alliance or really what their preference is for traditional sealed relative to any of the other format offerings. Because our only kind of representative format for sealed has been sealed alliance. So we see folks playing sealed alliance and say, oh gosh, like this is what folks want. And then, the question is that because this is the sealed that they can get or because this is the sealed that they prefer? Yeah. And I think, I don't know, the numbers so far here seem to suggest they do, folks really are excited about sealed, though there is a strong preference for traditional sealed over sealed alliance, which was interesting. Although maybe not interesting. I kind of expected that, but the survey, I mean, one of the reasons that we wanted to send this out in the first place was, gosh, the circles that I run in, it sounds like there are folks who want to be playing traditional sealed as opposed to sealed alliance. Is that just the circles that I happen to be running in, or is that kind of a wider preference? And again, you might say that, well, the people who answer the survey are the people in those circles. That could be fair, and we'll definitely be updating the results and hopefully getting a wider audience too. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of like when I first went to KFC, like not 2023, but 2022 KFC. I recall um, them having sealed alliance versus sealed like one deck. Um, and I recall like the flocks of people just going to three deck sealed. And it seemed to me that it wasn't that it was alliance that they were excited about. It's about getting three decks, is what I felt from by and large. And it didn't really feel like it was communicated very well that you could do, hey, whatever you do for this event, there's a second Amber, the second chance event, that you would just do the opposite event. So you'll end up leaving with the same amount of decks if you do both events. But it just seemed like people were excited to get three decks and try, and no matter what, it felt better than getting one deck and just whatever your chances were for that, which for a lot of people feels awful when it's one deck.
Mm-hmm. And we can get to that in a bit later too. That's another good teaser for some of the data that we have in the second half. But yeah, I think it's partially that. Like you talk about your two options at KFC one were Alliance, Sealed Alliance for three decks, and Sealed Solo like a single deck, and that's not really like the most fair comparison because in the past at Vault Tours and Premier events, players had the option of well, they played 3 deck sealed, and so it's like creating a false equivalence to say like, oh well, look, like they preferred Alliance over 1 deck sealed, therefore they prefer Alliance, right? And so I don't know, that's surprising to me that they didn't offer the traditional sealed as we refer to it at KFC
Right.
one.
Well, I don't know. I think there is probably just a if I'm putting on my I don't know CTP hat, my Ghost Galaxy hat, I'm guessing that there's a belief that sealed or alliance generally is going to be a thing that drives the game into a new tier of attendance. Like maybe if we're going to 10x the game in the next 5 years and that's our goal, well maybe the 1/10 of our eventual population. I don't know. Maybe you don't mind if half of them aren't such big fans of Alliance, and you think that you can, attract a whole bunch more folks with this other thing. I don't know. It's interesting to me,
So
but yeah.
yeah, let me take that segue now to like talk about the demographics of the responses, because as Dataforge Stream points out, there is some audience bias, and that's absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
Fully acknowledge that. So of our responses, 68% attended a premiere event last year in 2023. 65% started playing Keyforge during Coda, so they're old school players, and 73% are from North America, 22% from Europe. But what this tells me is that you have a lot of players who responded who went to a Vault Tour last year. You have a lot of players who responded who have been playing this game since its inception, and these are the diehard players. These are the ones that are still willing to travel, that are still playing this game after 4 or 5 years. They're the ones that responded to this. So it's logical that they're the ones that prefer Archon. They prefer traditional, fully acknowledge that. And so I would love to get more data from people that fall outside of that diehard circle, but we don't have that, obviously, and we have to go by what we have. And it's, I don't know, it makes me ask the question, who is the target audience for Ghost Galaxy's Keyforge? Because these are the only ones that we can find. They're all over Discord, they're on Reddit, they're on Facebook. Like we've seen these same kind of poll results. So like, who is the target audience? And if you're talking about a future world, Ghost Galaxy JT, where Alliance is what grows the game to the next level, like why not bring this game back for the diehards that have supported it and been here before you take that leap to say like Alliance is what could bring this to the next level.
Yeah, I mean the flip side to that too is our polls here, our results here may be representative of that highly enfranchised group primarily, but those are also your ambassadors for the game, right? Those are the people who are going to be driving your local scenes and reviving them. They're the people who are, saying like, yeah, like let's make this happen every week. I'm going to keep showing up, even if it's only one or two, until we get to that 8 to 12 range that can be firing consistently. So I know it's a little bit of both. I don't know. There's a chicken and the egg thing happening there, and we know a thing or two about chickens. Quick draw.
I know a couple things. I know they're afraid of hawks.
A-hawks or B-hawks?
All hawks.
Oh, all hawks. Okay.
Makes sense.
Hawk, do you have any, as someone who has favored Tilted Alliance more than probably the rest of our team, like how does this make you feel as far as like the target audience and what they were trying to do with Alliance when they brought it in?
To me, in retrospect, I think Alliance felt like a a side event, an extra quirk of a format, kind of like adaptive or any other fan-made format we've come up with. And I know Alliance was like a fan-made format. Well, it feels like it because my group had events specifically called Alliance back in 2019 where we did this exact same concept when only Coda and just AOA was coming out. So like it it really is something that I was surprised got fully endorsed by Ghost Galaxy, and so I just jumped in 100% into it, and my whole like local scene was like, "Oh, yo, cool! We did this first," and I'm sure we weren't the very first. I'm sure there were others. I'm not saying we're the first,
No,
but
let's run with that. You were the first, man. You were
yeah,
there.
yeah. But it feels kind of like a baby of mine. Like I wanted to see this succeed because I felt like it was good for the game. It felt like Keyforge. It still feels like Keyforge. And
Hmm.
it's not enough of a deck building process where it feels like, oh God, I just picked up Magic the Gathering. Doesn't feel like that. It's not that bad. It
It's
is
not.
making,
No,
yeah.
it's not that
So,
bad, but it's still like to me. I got into KeyForge because it didn't have deck building, and I come from a CCG background. And when I started to like play Sealed Alliance or just think about Alliance in general, it was just brain burning. And when you have 30 minutes before a vault to make your alliance, I did not enjoy that process. It was stressful. I didn't feel like I had enough time to make a good decision. And more often, I should have gone with a single deck more often than I did.
Mm.
and that's totally fair. I feel that, and I also know like like when I did Magic, my favorite format was limited, which is like sealed drafting. Like I love those situations of like under pressure having to do deck building or crafting your pool to optimize it in some way. Like I think that's a really fun thing that I was kind of missing after leaving Magic and coming to Keyforge. So I kind of see why there could be some appeal, especially for like Magic players, to see Keyforge as a true alternative. And there's a massive Magic base. Like I just there's so many. They always have Friday Night Magic happening.
Hmm.
So to me, it makes sense that why Keyforge would try and capitalize on players like that. But I
Hmm.
also know I came to Keyforge because Keyforge already felt like the best of it being limited because it's you get one deck and you have to make your pool of cards work for you. And I think about like other things like Commander, where like decks have names, decks have experiences that you're feeling when you're playing them, and that's exactly what Keyforge decks are. And and EDH, like Commander for Magic, once a deck is built, it pretty much stays the same. It stays pretty stationary. It's been solved, but every play you have with that deck is unique and different and fun. I was finding a lot of those same things with Keyforge and a $10 package, and I was like, I'm sold.
Yeah.
Like, so I think Keyforge already has those aspects that's appealing to Magic players. They're just behind this veil of like, oh well, yeah, there's no deck building, and players first go, oh, there's no deck building, before going, oh, there's no deck building. Like there's so much opportunity to optimize your pool in Keyforge, to optimize what you're given, that I think some players just don't quite go that one extra step to look at it to really see it as an alternative game. And I think there's a bit of mixed messaging on Alliance being the solve for that.
Yeah, I
So
think when you talk about trying to bring players in from another deck building game and they realize there's no deck building in Keyforge, the first thing that I've always heard historically is like, well, it must just be pay to win. You just find the best deck and you have it and you're good. And we all know that's not the case. Like
it's
there
not.
are very, very few decks that can win consistently, but they do it because of the player's skill. Like I can't buy Jacques or Fraud for many reasons, but even if I did, I would not necessarily be able to go in there and win like Nova and Dr. Sheep have done with those decks.
Hmm.
Like it's not the deck. And I think that's the kind of stigma that this game I think has fought. And I think they Ghost Galaxy should try to think of a way to fight that stigma that is not just, Alliance. Because I think Alliance is in search of this, Alliance implies that the game of Keyforge did not have enough agency to begin with. And I think, like, for me personally, as someone who has loved this game since the start, it's a little bit insulting because I think this game has, we've talked about it on the show before, a very good balance of luck, skill, and deck. And
Hmm.
I think to say that Keyforge needed more agency is to say that it was too close to Candyland and you want to bring it closer to Go. Like, that's the scale that I always kind of think of when I think about, like, some agency or no agency and full agency, right? And I just don't think it needed that. And so that that desire for Ghost Galaxy to inject agency into the game was based on that, and I reject that premise.
Mm.
I mean, I remember traveling to big events, and I know there were some players that felt like their luck just didn't come due because they were very good players and the event they traveled to, they didn't place very well. But then you look at like the sealed events that happened, and you notice, oh, there's a trend of like good players, no matter what they're given, are placing pretty well, which implies
Yep.
they have enough agency,
Yep.
maybe not to win it, but to beat maybe half the field just on sheer skill alone. But I do think it's a far cry to think that like one deck sealed is the way to go. Like I'm not
Mm-hmm.
gonna
Sure.
pay all this money and feel like, oh, I'm just gonna get one deck and this is it. Everyone knows you open the one deck and you're counting on it's a crap.
Hmm.
Sure, you could
Yep.
open 3 bad decks. You could, but the odds are a lot slimmer. It feels like at least you have a choice. But one thing I will say about Alliance is like I like the ability for you to change your deck in between rounds. That's one thing I feel like getting your 3 decks and picking one to play for the rest of the event. I feel like if you could choose your deck each round, it'd be way better. Like I think even just that little step of sealed, of having agency between games could help. I know some people won't use it. I know a lot of people will just sleeve up the one deck and stick with it, but one of my favorite things that I did is I would sleeve up 2 or even 3 decks like out of my sealed pool and I'm like, well, in between games, I might swap to my other deck because your pool is your pool. It's your sideboard. So like,
Mm-hmm.
I just think those like decisions are where you can have more agency, and I think they really like let the reins loose on Sealed Alliance. So like, let's dial it back a little bit and give players some agency. Give them some things they can do that make them feel like they're making more decisions and not just the initial one of choosing the deck, because everyone will regret if they, oh man, I should have played this one because this one I was thinking maybe this one, and then but I wanted to try this deck, and then you get floored and you're like, well, now I'm stuck with it, and that can kind of feel kind of bad. And that's one thing where I think the alliance tournament they have now is better because you can swap things in. So that's cool. But I think by and large the way that alliance has divided the community is bad. I think that it's really hard and it's really harsh. And it's something where like I've literally, when they first announced it, we've seen kickback from the community. It's
Mm-hmm.
been really hard to see.
Yeah.
That is
And it's been
tough.
hard
And
to parse. Sorry,
no, go
no,
for it.
just real quick. It's been hard to parse like who is the vocal minority or majority because, like you said, like it divided the community right away, and you had very strong opinions coming out of that. And I think Ghost Galaxy has struggled to find out like what the larger player base really does want.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm still fascinated by the formats that we're developing. And I think because of Alliance, like we have a format like Keymander out now, which is Alliance 2.0, 6 pod Alliance, still 3 houses, and I think it's amazing. I think it's so fun, it's so cool, and I think that it really opened the door, and I think already people being familiar with what Alliance was allowed it to continue and like be a successful fan made format. I think if Alliance hadn't been endorsed by Ghost Galaxy at all, I think that format would have been dead on arrival.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So I think that despite its pain, despite the things that we're talking about, and the rift that it's caused, I do think that it's caused more growth in the game overall, and I do think that it's caused players definitely to be more opinionated about what they think Keyforge is, which controversy is always good. You know, bad publicity is still publicity, sort of thing. So I just think, though, for premier events, I think we gotta take the deck building back out of Keyforge, and I think giving it back to the players. The reason why a lot of us got into the game, one of them was the lack of deck building, and I I will say I'll stay here if there's deck building, but I'd prefer it if it didn't. And that's after a year of me like in fully endorsing Alliance, loving Alliance, and then being like, you know what? I think I just kind of miss Archon. There's a grind associated with Alliance of finding that perfect pod, and Sealed Alliance is not as much of an affront because it's like you literally have your 3 decks to choose from. So it's, yeah, you have that pressure cook of 30 minutes, but I think for the complexity that it causes for so many other people, I think it's gotta go.
Well, that's a great point. And to bring it back to the sealed specifically, I there's no arguing that you're adding an extra decision point, right? You are now testing somebody on their ability to construct a deck from 6 pods, 9 pods, what have you, and that is a skill testing moment. Absolutely, 100%. Now, whether or not it's the sort of skill test that you signed up for initially is a different question, but absolutely, it is skill testing. Is it worth, or are the things that we're getting from Alliance worth the loss of the like purity of the game? And when I say purity, I mean more simplicity, right? Like, hey guys, like you get a deck, it's a unique thing, you open it and play. Like that has like a punch, it's easy to explain. You sit down a new person to explain the game to them, you bring them to your LGS. It's super simple, right? Versus I don't know. I think like, hey, come and play for your first time. We're doing Sealed Alliance is a little bit of a tougher sell. Now I say that, of course, having like never tried to bring anybody into my LGS and like teach them Sealed Alliance, but that's kind of like my like very biased opinion.
I mean, I'll tell you, having run events and been a part of like the local scene, we have never tried to do a Sealed Alliance event.
Yeah.
And
like,
we've like thought about it, and we just like, it's too complicated. Like, especially for thinking about trying to bring new players in, it's much easier to just like say, hey, you can open a couple of decks, pick the one you want to play. Like, that's like way easier. Otherwise, you've got everyone sitting around a table, crowdsourcing everyone's input to be like, well, no, you should pair, and then it's just not really that fun for the person that's happening to, who's overloaded with information. So
Yeah,
I
my group's the same way. You know, like I run events for my local community as well, and we have like somewhere between like 5 and 10. And at the Winds of Exchange release event, we had 8 people there. Not a single one of them was like, we should do Sealed Alliance. Everyone's just like, let's just get a deck and play. We've played Sealed almost every week since then with at least 4 people. And every single time we just play single deck. And, you know, sometimes people don't even bring sleeves. And it's just like, how are you supposed to, if you're just playing casually, like, you know, not only do you have to buy 2 to 3 decks for Sealed Alliance, but you also got to pay more for sleeves. And I mean, if you didn't get in on that Asmodee fire sale, getting those sleeves for like 40 cents a pop, I mean, I don't know how I'd be able to afford sleeves personally.
oh man, I should have bought more. I just didn't expect I would go through them all already in 1 year.
Oh my
Like,
gosh. Everybody else buying these decks in quick draws, like, send the sleeves over this way.
Send me the
Bring the
sleeves.
sleeves truck.
oh
Right.
man,
I still have a bunch. I bought
I
so many.
remember at one time sleeving up a commander cube of like over 1,400 cards, and it cost me like an arm and a leg to get sleeves
Yeah.
for that thing.
Well, one of the first things I thought was I built a cube for a different game, and I was like, I'm using all these Keyforge sleeves there.
Yeah, yeah. I will say I got a bunch of the art ones, the Keyforge logo on the back, and I played at an event that had a judge there, and he made me swap my sleeves out every time I made it. Like, so he was like, "This one, it needs replaced," and somebody was like, "Do you have any that aren't this?" I'm like, I whipped up like 3 more packs of them. I'm like, I got of these. It was like, I'm gonna give you my Dragon Shield sleeves. I'm like, okay, fine.
Nice.
So,
Yeah.
quality not the best, but they're great. They're fine.
Yeah, they get the job done for casual events for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, so sorry, JT, do you have something else you wanted to bring up first?
no, I mean, I don't know about put a bow on this section or what, but like, I guess I'm trying, but I'm having a hard time seeing one, like who's asking for the Alliance in their sealed. I'm having trouble seeing that, and I'm having trouble also being like, this is the sort of, strategic motivation for doing it, right? It makes it harder to introduce new players. It kind of dilutes the like simplicity of the game as you're describing it in an elevator to somebody. So I don't know. I totally 1,000% like get how it would appeal to you as a player, and maybe there are enough players like that who want to come from Magic and like you're just going to go gangbusters selling to that slice of folks who want a little bit of deck building but not go full unique. But I don't know. So that's interesting. That's what I was trying to get at, and what I was hoping would like come out from the survey. And I'm not sure yet. So it's interesting.
I mean, the one thing I will say that I like about Alliance is that the waste of cards doesn't feel as much. Like you are still using 100% of that deck somewhere. Now it gets really muddy though. Keyforge, like single decks, no wasted cards. I have 500 decks, not a single card wasted. I can whip out any deck and it's playable. Alliance, all of a sudden I've got 12 cards here, 12 cards here, 24 cards here. I'm getting piles of mismanaged things all around my desk and area. And now I'm feeling like, oh no, I'm really getting into Magic, which is what I wanted to leave behind in the first place. So that the wasted cards also is something that I'm not really loving on. Especially because when you think about like bringing it to a premier event, you have to make sure that those cards are somehow still attached to the deck, I guess, for some reason. Not sure why, but it's something where like I think we need to the same reason why they dumbed down the number of formats. I think this group of a format is too much, I think, to grow the game.
Interesting.
Well,
Interesting.
I didn't think that we'd have you on here this evening, B-Hawk, and you'd be like admitting that maybe Alliance isn't the right thing. But I will send your check as soon as I can.
Thanks, appreciate that. Yeah, and I mean I love playing Alliance. I think it's fun, but I do see the growing pains that it's caused for the game, and I do see the potential that is not being realized, and the angst. It's just getting to me, man. I just don't like all the negativity.
I hear you, man. One thing I really appreciated about Keyforge when I got into the online community, I should say, is like the community itself and the positivity and the optimism that surrounded this game and the community, and that's definitely eroded a bit the last year. And that is pretty heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's tough. I mean, we came out of a pretty tough stretch. It's hard to say how, what could have, well, I don't know. I don't want to like second guess too much, but I mean, hats off to the GG folks. They're doing an awful lot with a few people.
For sure. They're doing a great job. Amazing job.
I think they have a focus
it's really
group
cool
of like
to see
12 Alliance fans. And that's their focus group. So
I mean, if you're sitting around in the office, I can just imagine be like, well, do you want to play Keyforge? It's like, well, do we have to open another deck? Well, what if we just mash them together? Like that seems easier than opening a new deck.
There you go.
I don't know.
Interesting.
Well, I also wanted to put a bow in the first section, but there was a few other things that I found from the data right before we started. I just want to go over that quickly. So we talked about the demographics and how there wasn't really like a major difference. But real quick, like we had 66 of the responses out of 93 came from North America. Those were, again, as we said, 2-1 in favor of traditional sealed over sealed alliance. 34 to 32 was Archon to sealed. So like even in North America, that was Archon and traditional sealed were about 50-50. Archon versus Alliance, 62 to 4 in favor of Archon. So North America is strongly in favor of Archon. There was a theory that like with the French Discord saying like they favored Alliance, like maybe that'd be different in Europe. And we look outside of North America, and it was 24 to 1 Archon over Alliance. And it was it was about, actually it was 18 to 7 in favor of traditional sealed. So outside of North America was actually more in favor of traditional sealed over sealed alliance. I believe.
Now I'm just questioning the whole data set because I remember hearing, maybe it was just a rumor, that everyone in Europe loved Alliance.
I heard that too. I know.
They
didn't see our survey apparently.
Come in fluxing in with like their triple legionary trainer scholar decks, like joining the church, and I'm just like, okay, you guys are cool, and then turns out it's not as popular. maybe our data. I mean, one, it is a pretty small data set. It's not all
It
encompassing.
is,
It's
is.
right.
like less than 100.
Hmm.
It's hard to imagine that that represents all of Keyforge. We're not a monolith, blah 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 blah. But
It's
So,
fair.
so
sounds
let's
like
say we're calling on, if you're listening, Alex Fakir. I'm not sure how to pronounce the username. Get this to the French folks. Ashitaka, maybe. I don't know. Get this out to the French folks. Make sure they're represented here. I don't know. Yanni, the Finnish. Am I saying that right? Make sure they're represented. No, I might be fumbling on that one, Jan. But forgive me. And I think yeah, we tried to hit the the Swedes in the Nordic server, where many of them reside.
hmm
Um,
Yeah. The last point was another demographic one. There were 62 players that responded to the survey that attended a premiere event last year. 44 of those 62 started the game in Coda. So the people that are attending events are, 2/3 or so people that have been around this game for the long haul. And I think that should be noted as far as like, who you're building this game for and who is still sticking around. Like this is the diehard group.
it is, which I was surprised to see like the sliver of woe being like bigger than the couple of sets before it, of like in terms of respondents. So that's like good to me that we're getting some like Winds of Exchange people, like people that started with Winds of Exchange. And I think Winds of Exchange is a really great set to start with. Like it's not as simple as Coda. Coda was beautiful in its simplicity,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
100%.
just gotten more complicated since then. Winds of Exchange maybe complicated. Winds of Exchange Alliance maybe even more so, but it's so much fun. It is like the propensity of luck and like the big plays in Keyforge that I recall like of the Coda of old with the big library access turns, the big bait and switch turns. I just feel like this was like what I was getting with Winds of Exchange again, and it felt really fresh. So I'm hoping more people discover this game because it's really great. I just don't know how to get to them.
Yeah.
Where are these new players at?
totes my goats, as they say. Totes my goats. Yeah.
Well, all right. Let's shift over to part two. What do you say?
Yeah.
Part two. There's no place to go except part two after part one. Let's do it.
That's true. So I'll let you introduce this one, JT. You did all the legwork, I should say,
Well, it
on
was
putting this data
it
together.
was your idea initially, so I'll give you credit there for giving me some work to do. I don't know. It was I wasn't sure
What I'm
what
good
I was
at.
going to do at the time.
What I'm good at.
Well, I mean, one of the big things that you hear folks espousing when they're talking about Sealed Alliance is that you're not going to get stuck with the dud. You can make something that's going to be playable. The field's going to be closer because we're all making better decks, right? And we were kind of thinking, well, like, all right, we have some tools to quantify how good a deck is. Can we use some data and get a sense for how even the playing field is in a pick one of three, say, sealed world versus a sealed alliance world? And so yeah, we did that. We went to Dex Keyforge, we went to SAS, and we pulled a bunch of decks. Now there are some kind of not peculiarities, but the things we should talk about in the process, right? So we grabbed about 5,000 decks just because that's the max export you can do on DOK, and I wasn't feeling up to getting on Nova's ban list with us crawling the whole site again. And so I grabbed those, and I grabbed a whole bunch of Coda decks. Now Coda particularly because one, there's nothing like enhancements or tokens that are going to mess with your house specific SAS or ARC scores, right? You look at a Winds of Exchange deck on Decks of Keyforge, you're going to see a clump of the SAS clustered in the token house, the house of the token, and kind of all of the credit for token making goes to that house, and that just wasn't something that we could work with at scale. Similarly, for things like Mass Mutation and even a little bit Dark Tidings, like we didn't want to have to worry about where enhancements got placed and how that affected the relative house strength, the strength of the pods across houses. And lastly, the set itself didn't really matter. what we needed was a way to kind of approximate a general Keyforge set and have numbers that we felt reasonably comfortable that described the relative strengths between houses, right? So it doesn't matter if we're talking about Logos or Equidon. All that matters is, the gap between Logos and Untamed versus the gap between Equidon and Unfathomable, say. And if those are reasonably consistent set over set. And lastly, on top of all that, I think the SAS in general is most mature. I mean, I guess by definition, with respect to Coda, and probably SAS and Arc describe Coda better. This is my opinion, than any other set, largely due to the nature of the cards, the card pool. And I don't know. I guess you could take issue with any of those points, but I'm gonna pause there. Oh, I have one more. Lastly, I think as you get past the point when SAS was introduced as a ranking mechanism, you'll start seeing folks importing decks into decks of Keyforge, maybe more in order of what they think their strength will be. And since we had to use import date as a way to kind of grab, semi-random decks out of there, I didn't want that to be a thing that I worried about. It was kind of a minor thing, but hey, that's part of it too.
Yeah. You did your best to mitigate, the bias and the, skew this data in any way possible. The only other things I want to add is that, like you said, the Coda scores are probably the most accurate. They've had the most time to be refined. They're the simplest cards. And they actually have a lot of OP data, which was a major factor in the SAS and ARC scores. So there's a lot in its favor as a good metric. And I just want us to say, we are using SAS and ARC as a stand-in for deck strength. It is not perfect. We all know that. That's okay. And, I fully acknowledge and understand better than anyone that a 70 SAS deck can beat an 80 SAS deck any day of the week. Not a big deal. So there are some limitations with this, but it is a stand-in, and this is kind of using this to analyze and look at the power level of decks and discrepancy you would get in a sealed pool, whether that is traditional sealed or sealed alliance. So I think that's the only other preface that I had for this.
Totally. If you wanted to, you could run a similar experiment at home. Just use some random number generators to give you house values. And the benefit to us using, SAS from decks of Keyforge is, well, the distributions within each house kind of matches what you'd expect each house pod or a house pod in the wild to look like. And similarly, the relationship between the different houses in the set kind of also gives us a little bit more of a realistic texture to those values. So yeah, if the Coda thing bothers you, just imagine, we use this to generate a model that kind of matches or follows a generic Keyforge set, and just think of it as numbers that are going to give you strength scores per pod, if you like.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is this to do? What are we doing with this data?
Let's talk about that. Let's get there. So,
yeah.
Drum roll. JT has some fancy charts, graphs, statistics that we're going to do our best to explain to the listeners. And for the people that are watching, hopefully he pulls that up and we can all see that together here. So what we're trying to do here is really think about when people talk about the benefits of sealed alliance over traditional sealed. One thing that is often said is they wanted to, first of all, create player agency or increase player agency. But the second thing was that you mentioned a little bit ago, that we don't want someone to go to a sealed event, open up a dud or 3 duds, and feel like they lost. And so many times people attribute their loss in a sealed event to just, I opened bad decks and I didn't have a chance. And so I think sealed alliance is, at least the perception, was intended to mitigate that factor of opening poor decks to give everyone a better chance. And we want to look at this data to actually look and see, does it really level the playing field like the perception was? And what's the best way we can kind of talk through these numbers for the listeners? So I think I'll start by saying, if you look at just the SAS of the entire deck, obviously if you open a single deck, you're going to have a lower average SAS than you will if you open 3 decks. And that is when you're only evaluating the best deck that you get out of those. So again, this is trying to mimic a real sealed event where you are picking one deck or you're making one alliance and playing that. and you are doing it solely based on what is the maximum SAS that you can get. And if you open a single deck, your max SAS is going to be lower than if you open 3 decks, right? On average. And so that's a very
3 decks and
easy
then
one to
pick the
compare.
best one. Yes.
3 decks and pick the best one. That's a very easy one to understand, easy to compare. And so when we throw Alliance into the mix, again, we do see a bump in your SAS in the deck that you can make if you are making your deck optimally. If you are choosing the 3 best pods of different houses by arc, then you will have a higher SAS deck than you would in traditional sealed. So,
Well, so just to kind of like visually explain this graph that I'm looking at, I see like kind of a bigger cluster of blue data, which is single deck, and the like 62 to 64 SAS range or arc range, whatever this is. 62 to 64 is like that big cluster. Maybe there's a standard deviation around that between like 56 and 68 or something. But like it's between that region, 64, 68 is the middle. If I move over to one of 3, suddenly I'm at like the 60 to 68.
Yep, 68.
So
68 was the average for pick 1.
so that's like 4 to 6 points higher,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
like already. And that's just like I'm looking like middle of the middle. And it's also kind of like looks like it's toned in shorter. Maybe that's my perception,
Mm-hmm.
but it looks like it's coned
Yeah, it's
to a smaller range
tighter
of values.
curve, if you will. Yeah.
Tighter curve. Sure. I don't know standard deviation speak. I didn't take stats. And then I look at Alliance and I see like a big jump from like that 68 to like all of a sudden 74-ish. 74 looks like a big peak, and that's like 8 points higher.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
pretty big jump. So
Right. So yeah,
but it also looks like it's way wider, like that.
there you go.
Looks,
So that's a good observation. So what you're seeing is that not only is the arc higher for Alliance, but the curve looks flatter, right?
yeah.
And so what that's telling us is that there are some alliances you could make from a 3 deck sealed pool that max out at a SAS that is much lower than what other people are making, right?
Yeah.
And if I open up an alliance and I can make a 68 SAS deck, and you open up an alliance and you can make a 78 SAS deck, that's a fairly reasonably big difference. Not unwinnable by any means, and this is a game of matchups, so anything can happen. But again, this is a stand-in for deck strength. The expectation, I think, with Alliance is that it would level the playing field. But this is the really fascinating thing that we found from this data is that the standard deviation is actually higher for Alliance when compared to traditional sealed, which means that it's not really leveling the playing field. It is increasing the deck strength, yes, but it's also flattening the curve in a way that it is allowing more people to get like further away from that average than they could if they were playing traditional sealed. Which
You mean
you
less
could
people?
less people. Sorry,
Less people getting away from the average, which means like fewer people will be lucky enough to open something that good.
no. There are more strong decks in Alliance,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there are more people away from that average deck in Sealed Alliance, which
Mm,
means that you're having a wider discrepancy in deck strength.
yeah.
And you're still having people that are like coming in below average, right?
Yeah.
And so you are actually making the problem worse. If you thought that traditional sealed was deck dependent, by making it Sealed Alliance a higher standard deviation, I think implies you are actually making that problem worse.
Well, and I think also though their point of like, well, you could always just pick a deck. Well, all of a sudden you're just lopping off 8 to 10 points just right off the bat,
Yeah,
like almost immediately, like
yeah,
without even considering alliance. You're at a disadvantage if you don't do alliance and you're just picking the best deck in your group.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah,
so to
that's
recap
right.
that though, we're seeing these 2 curves. There's one for kind of pick 1 sealed, one for sealed alliance, and there's about an 8-point difference between the means of those curves. So on average, right, if you walk into a sealed alliance event and say, yeah, I'm gonna just pick a deck and run with it, you're kind of saying exactly, I'm gonna accept on average an 8 point, let's call it, value difference in my prospects, right? Which is interesting. And yeah, quick draws point is also spot on. Not only,
Oh,
well,
sorry, I need to find my drink. Hold on.
see, this is the stuff we're leaving in for the extra sloppy episode, the minimally edited ones. I love it. Yeah, this absolutely blew my mind because like we ran this experiment and we were like, I think we're going to see stronger decks in Alliance. Like that's directly provable. We didn't need to run any experiments to show that, right? You can write a few maxes down on your paper and be like, yep, it's going to be bigger in the Alliance world than in the non-Alliance world. What I also expected to, but didn't see, was I expected the Alliance curve to be tighter, right? I expected much more decks to be clustered around a kind of a central mean, and and you'd look at that and say, okay, gosh, I guess the field is actually more level in Alliance world, and it doesn't look like that. It actually looks like if anything, and we need to dig a little bit more into the relevance of a lot of these, but if anything, it's a little bit flatter, a little bit wider in the Alliance world. There's more of a spread between your expectation and deck value, deck strength in that setting, and you can interpret that a number of different ways. If you're just thinking about this, ignoring meta scores, whether you're including a board wipe or not, whether or not you're going for a big combo or not, like if you're just thinking about the quality of cards in your deck, then it appears from the results here that the Sealed Alliance world is a better test of your ability to open quality cards than the pick one sealed world. That was kind of an interesting point. I 1000% expected to be sitting here looking at a more even playing field on the Alliance side and asking ourselves, like, okay, it's more even, but is the amount that it's more even enough to justify the loss of simplicity, right?
Yeah. And just to put some extra numbers on this, so the standard deviations that you found with these 5,000 decks, and again, like it's actually 4,998, I think,
Yes.
that you looked at,
Yes.
because of having to get pools of 3,
Had
right?
to kind of make
But
pools of 3, yeah.
and so that is using those pools of 3 to make these decks or pick your deck that you wanted. The standard deviation for the traditional sealed was 4.6 in arc points,
Yep.
and it was 5.06 in Alliance. So whether or not that is statistically significant, I'm not going to say. It's 10% higher though. 10% higher standard deviation
5%.
for Alliance.
Yeah.
No, it's 10%.
Is it 10%?
It is 10%
Oh, yeah,
higher.
yeah, you're right. No, totally. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
gonna cut that part
So-
out. I won't edit anything else.
That's right.
So
But so let's also give Alliance the benefit of the doubt here and just say okay, let's just say that that's not statistically significant. Let's say that that is a little bit overblown. Let's say it's a bad sample size. Let's just call them even, right? Like even if we call these standard deviations roughly close enough to not really be statistically significant, then there's so much overhead involved with the Alliance part of this, and the purported benefit was the player agency and evening of the matches and the decks, and we're not seeing that at all. So
'Cause ultimately you want to have player skill be more involved in this process, right? So that means evening out deck strength in some way.
Yeah.
And
that's how I always interpreted one of the goals and purposes of Alliance. Now, the Cloggin asked a good question, which is it's an astute observation. So where does, if at all,
say the word.
Players.
That's not you putting words in Cloggin's mouth.
Ability to know the cards / memorize all of the things to be able to make the best out of their Alliance deck candidates. So essentially, what I believe you're asking the Cloggin is, we're assuming that a player makes a perfect decision with their Alliance, right? And that's hard to do. Unless you have the decks all scanned, it's pretty difficult to be like, okay, that's a 23 arc house, that's a 26, that's 27, that's my maximum I can do. That's hard to do, right? So what we're seeing is that this agency that we all thought was let the players play the game and decide based on even decks, that agency of in-game decision making, maybe is not what they meant, or maybe it's not what we're actually seeing. What we are seeing is that agency that's talked about with Alliance actually comes in the form of deck building and the skill that you have in being able to put together the right alliance. And this goes back to like the first part of this show where we're talking about what kind of players we have and what preference they have. They're more of the traditional players from Coda. They're the diehards that still travel to events, and we're talking about creating this agency in the form of deck building from a bunch of players who got into Keyforge because they didn't have to deck build. So the agency is not what we expected. I think my takeaway for this is that yeah, Alliance adds agency, but it adds agency in the form of deck building, not in the form of playing the game.
Sorry, Cluggin's comment just got me.
Oh, that was good. It was good. No, yeah, totally. I think we introduced an element of deck building that is a skill testing thing, as we said before. Like, that's true, 100% true. And if that's what you wanted to add as a skill testing lever to the game, then that is a success, right? You can't say otherwise. But in terms of did we give players the ability to or do we level the playing field for players or provide an opportunity for a more level playing field? I don't think I'm seeing that here, and that's what I would like to be convinced of, because I believe that is what folks most often hearken to or
Yeah,
reference.
so
Yeah.
I would compare this to like, okay, the ability to analyze a good deck
Hmm.
is a summation of the ability to sum three houses. So like if you can evaluate three houses independently, you can probably develop a sense of what deck is best. So then you do that three times. You're still doing it nine houses overall, but sometimes you could just look at one deck, see one house and be like, this is the bonkers house. This is it. This deck's the best. Like you don't even have to look at the rest of it. You see like, oh, this has 16 pips, two board wipes, I'm good. Like you can just see that roughly on an Archon card and call that, hey, this is the best deck. But when you have to do that nine times for all the houses and then think about cross house synergies, yeah, there's a lot more complicated things you can do, but it's a an evaluation skill that I feel like is predominantly untested for a lot of players, but like players that want to travel to these events and win will take the extra steps to learn these things. It's kind
Hmm.
of like oh, I can win one at least one more game if I just learn how to do a a, a mediocre skill that anybody can learn. Like I see the stats right here. Even if I have to just memorize them card by card, this is a good card. This is a bad card. This house, it's an average looking house. That's probably like what 20. That's a 20, 20, 20, 20. That's 80. But then this is a bad house. That's 12. So then you minus 8 points. Okay, so that's 72. So like there's a
Did,
way of like
sorry,
just
Beahawk,
guesstimating.
did you just say that 20 plus 20 plus 20 equals 80?
Sorry, 60. But like you can just like you can look at your houses and you can kind of get a sense of like what is a mediocre deck. A
Mhm.
mediocre deck is like 66 to 67. So 22 points per house is middle of the road. And then it's like, oh, this deck is much better than the average house. Or this house is also much better than the average house. So then that like ticks it up to 70, 75 range.
Okay, Beahawk's dealing with the family. We'll give him a second. Uh,
Yeah, so um, that's a way of roughly guesstimating houses and the overall deck strength. So just in that like 3 minute explanation, maybe you can take that to your next yield evaluation and do better. But like it is a skill though, and it gets
mhm.
better the more you do it. So but it's also something where it's like why the same reason what did we get rid of that we didn't want players to have to be better at for them to have an advantage? I feel like it
I
had
can't
something to do
I
with
can't remember it either.
memorizing. Yeah, it's like it's at the tip of my tongue. It's something about the Archon card learning the cards in the deck. There's this two. So like they got rid. Yes, okay. They got rid of you having to memorize an Archon list, right? Because they determined that this is not a memorization game, right? So we're getting rid of skills in the game already that we are considering not Keyforge skills. And now deck building is suddenly a Keyforge skill in a game where there's no deck building. So I do see the uh, I don't know, the bad of this in general.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, I don't know what else to add to that. I mean, I, yeah, I've had a local show up to my LGS last week, and first time I'd ever met her, she came back to Keyforge. She'd been playing for a while, hasn't played for the last couple sets, and we told her about Alliance, and she's like, "Oh, well, I started playing Keyforge because I didn't want a deck build." Like, and how many times have we all heard that? Like, a lot.
Yeah.
Everyone has a story of someone saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yep.
Biog, what happened, man? You were supposed to be the Alliance champion.
I love Alliance, man. I'll play it.
Yeah,
Anyone want to play right now? I'll play Alliance.
maybe that
I
should be
actually just
our
got done with
game.
my Hexad Alliance spreadsheet, which pretty in depth.
All right, right on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I would have gotten so excited about an Alliance side event at a Vault Tour. I've been like, oh yeah, this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna do it this one time. I'm gonna go deep. But I don't know. I have a tough time
I just don't
fully
think it's
embracing
well
Unsealed.
placed as like the premier event for Keyforge.
Hmm.
I just don't. I think by and large Sealed is a great event. One, it in a lot of players' minds it just averages the playing field. It feels like I have a chance of doing well if I just open a good deck and just play Keyforge, right? Like, and but also it's perceived because good players continuously place well at sealed events because they know how to play well no matter what they're given. So I think in that case, yeah, it does kind of help even out the playing field, and I think it's great for that. And I think it's something that really is a part of Keyforge is being able to just open a deck and play it. It's like quintessential to the Keyforge message that we keep it
Mhm.
as part of like a premier event. So, I mean, as much of an advocate for Alliance as I am, when I saw that Sealed was not, I was more sad about that. And I
Hmm.
think that's part of why I'm kind of turning my back a little bit on it, mostly as a premier Vault Tour event.
Hmm. Interesting.
Behawk, I want to go back to something you said earlier that I said we would get back to. And you talked about how Winds of Exchange you felt was a good set for Alliance. And why is that?
I think the token mechanism that Keyforge went with, the design of the token, of it using your deck, of it being unchangeable to the deck, like you get a prospector deck, it is tied to that deck. But suddenly with Alliance, we know like with Winds of Exchange, sometimes you can just open a bad token. It can look like a great deck. I'm like, I see triple trainer, I see all these cards lining up, and then I look at the token and I'm like, Explorer with oh man, like or like some of these other tokens. I mean, I know in sealed it is fine. Like almost every token is at least usable. I just tend to try and find decks that don't make many tokens in those circumstances. But when you introduce Alliance into Winds of Exchange, suddenly you can look at your three decks. You can see that triple trainer pod that's for some reason grouped with Explorer, and then you see your other deck has Scholar, and it doesn't have any trainers, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. The stars aligned. I've made a perfect deck. Like, I was able to group the perfect pod with the perfect token for it. Or like Prospector with like Esquire and mass buyouts and closed doors, like all sorts of fun stuff you can do. But sometimes you open decks and it's like, this token just doesn't look like it goes with this deck. But when you look at three of them, suddenly it feels like you're able to have the agency. One, it's fixing the disparity of the Keyforge token in Winds of Exchange. Like I feel like that's real, and it's like it felt almost convenient. It's like, hey, we kind of know that some decks are ruined by by the token, let's introduce a format where that doesn't really matter as much. Like that's kind of what it feels like with Alliance being pushed so strongly, and why honestly I love Alliance specifically for Winds of Exchange. Like, and especially when we got to like later in the season where like I already knew Winds of Exchange, I knew all the cards, I knew all the tokens, what it did. Suddenly crafting the best Alliance deck didn't seem so hard, especially when I knew, oh, I can just swap this token out for this one. Like, I think that's something where like that was really good and powerful, but I see it being very short-lived. I don't think it'll be as powerful for Grim Reminders because I don't think any other set will have that weakness and that disparity and house choice.
Hmm. No, I think you make a valid point. I think it makes a lot more sense, or I think that WoW sealed alliance benefits a lot from the alliance-ness of it. Totally, totally. I'm also very interested too. I think we can run this experiment again that we were talking about here with our or showing on screen for the folks here still, but with something like Worlds Collide or simulate larger house disparity, right? And you just say, oh gosh, I have to play Brobnar somewhere. This is terrible. And I don't know. I'm curious about that because I think that that's another scenario where you may in fact see a more even playing field with Sealed Alliance than with traditional Sealed. And then it just becomes a question of like, okay, but do we want to see Sealed Alliance or Sealed becoming a game of archetypes and the top tables are all Saurian Star Alliance X decks? And then what does that mean? Are you okay with that sort of a thing? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of responsibility, I think, from GG and future sets then to really balance it well. I think when you have Alliance as a part of it, otherwise you're just going to see a few houses never get used, especially in Sealed Alliance. Like your Worlds Collide example was a really good one. I think if Grim Reminders or Ember Skies have one or two houses that are duds, then I think it you know I don't know. Do you guys think that adversely affects Alliance more than
So
regular
I
Sealed?
think one thing I think designing with Alliance's mind in mind is an awful idea. I think you should never do that because then suddenly you're catering to a norm, which is obviously the least popular option in Keyforge. And so then you're going to be opening less powerful decks. And in a game where sets are evergreen, that's a bad idea. You don't want to have another AOA or DT. Sorry,
Whoa, whoa. Hold
sorry.
on a second.
You just don't. You just don't want it. It's
You
bad
just
for the
like
game.
you stabbed both of us in one sentence.
You just don't want it. I'm sorry. I'll call it out as I see it. You just don't want another set like that. So
Yeah.
I think you want to make sure that you're pushing the design forward for Keyforge, and if you're suddenly making compensations with Alliance in mind, then I think you're just steering down a path that I think we can't really go back from.
Interesting. Interesting stuff, guys. I don't know. I think it's been good. I also want to wrap this up. You got anything else you want to say?
No, I hit on everything that I wanted to. I really, I don't know. If I could make, I don't normally like use this as a soapbox, but I would really like Ghost Galaxy to think about this, look at hard data. It seems like a lot of the stuff that they've decided the last year or so has been a lot of anecdotal feedback where, at a vault tour, someone's like, oh yeah, Sealed Alliance is a lot of fun. I love it. It's been great. I'm happy to have Sealed back. And that they take that as like everybody likes Sealed Alliance. I just would implore them to try to dig a little bit deeper at what your players are asking for and what they want and how you're, communicating out what you're doing and why. Because that's where I feel like there's just been this huge disconnect, is in the messaging. Like I've not been able to relate to a lot of the messages that have come out about why they've made the decisions. It doesn't seem to jive with my experiences, and so that's really all that I would say. That's the last kind of word I want to have on that tonight.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think this was, to be honest, I was very excited to talk on this topic because I think it's important. It was also very. I was worried. I was, I think our sort of mission in capital M mission 70-ish episodes ago was like, let's spread our enthusiasm for Keyforge. And I think this is a tough one because I'm not terribly enthusiastic about Sealed Alliance. If you enjoy it, that's awesome. Like keep enjoying the game and spreading your enjoyment for the game too. But I think it was also important to look at the numbers and see where folks are at, and the experiment we did as well, getting at sort of what the playing fields look like with these different sealed formats is kind of important stuff that is worth talking through. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I agree.
Last thing, big thanks to folks who kind of helped spot check some stuff, the peer reviews, as it were. Murph, Orion, Zoc, kind of looked at some of the methodology and at least were polite enough not to tell me to my face that they thought I was an idiot. And to the Professor Tobin Lopez over from Warcaster Forge, he had, I should say, they had mentioned on an episode of theirs offhandedly something about stats, and it's like, okay, I'm going to bug this person about stats things. So thank you muchly for that. All right. I think we could hear a word from our sponsors, unless y'all had anything there. Quick one today is sloppy as well. This episode of Bottom of the Beaker is sponsored by Urchin's Itch Cream. It's for what's urchin you. Thanks so much, Urchin's Itch Cream. Gosh.
Beaker doesn't get it. Beaker was not amused.
Beaker, it was a busy day. I was driving home and I was like, I gotta come up with something.
Okay. I get it.
Okay. Yeah. Folks, I want to let you all know that Bottom of the Beaker is typically recorded live right here at twitch.tv/sloppylabwork Wednesday evenings at 9:30 Eastern. You can find recordings of our past shows and other streams over at youtube.com. Search for @sloppylabwork over there. And for the very best content, 34? No, 57 times distilled and scraped from the bottom of the beaker. Search for that very phrase in your podcatcher of choice, and we'll be there whether or not you want to play 3-deck sealed or Seal Alliance. We'll be there. Maybe some grumbles. I don't know. No grumbles. We'll have good times. Thanks so much for jumping in, B-Hawk. This was a pleasure to have you hop in there too.
Thanks for asking.
Oh yeah.
Thanks,
the door
man.
is
Appreciate
open.
it as always.
It's never a closed door negotiation. It's an open door negotiation, my guy. And Quick Draw, any words for the folks getting off of the last audio stop?
Thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. I had a lot of fun. Hope you did too. And stay sloppy out there.
Stay sloppy indeed. Stay sloppy, my friend. Okay, cool. Fun times. I will definitely make any and all of the data that we used here available to for folks to look at, to do with what they will, hoping that we can expand on the survey results and get those in the show notes. They will be in the show notes, I promise. Oh, actually, maybe not. Because we were talking about getting this one out this week, potentially, instead of next week. So it's very likely to be a low production value, minimal effort on editing sort of a deal, but more timely as a result, perhaps. So very cool. Well, what should we play this evening, gents?
I was thinking, I don't know, I'm not sure how we'll do it with Hand and Brain, but we should do traditional sealed.
I was thinking the same, and then I was like, but if we open all duds, the people are gonna be like, "Told you guys."
we can cut the stream early, or we can just pump the numbers a little bit and pick out some better decks.
Yeah.
But I think we should do to represent the data that we had here. I think we should do a Coda traditional sealed.
Wow. Okay. Do you have Coda decks to crack, or are you talking Arcane Matrix?
Archon Matrix. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I was
Can we
thinking.
sort it by import date or something? I really want a first edition, first print run, Coda.
I think you know what? I think I have the decks that were used for our
I didn't ask this question, and I wish I would have.
Ask it now. I'll edit it in.
What?
Edit it in.
I know, but in the case, like, so, like, the highest possible SAS, like, that we had, what was the case where, like, the pods they came from were also good decks, like, in their format?
Hmm.
So, like,
Mm-hmm.
if you were given a clump of 3 decks and you were doing pick one of 3 for sealed versus alliance, was it possible that a pack of 3 was better for one format over the other?
Yes, it was possible that a pack of like it was possible that you opened, let's just use numbers, right? Like round numbers to make it easy, like 3 decks that were rated 60 individually, but then you combine them in such a way to get like an 85 or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
that was
that's
possible.
that's what I was suspecting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could have opened one, or you could have opened 3 decks theoretically that were 60 SAS, that were 30, 15, 15. Make an alliance out of that, you got 90.
Yeah. Okay.
So that is an interesting question, though.
Yeah, and that was kind of what it was. It was interesting to look at too, because it's not just like everybody moved to the right. It wasn't like an everybody moved to the right sort of a situation. It was like some people jumped to the front of the line, and other people like they took a step over, and now they're like, what the heck, the back of the pack.
Yeah, yeah. They
Yeah,
like they took a step over and it is below the rest of the field.
yeah.
Like that's what I'm getting at. Is like your placement in that range. Like that's what I mean. Like not just like making the better deck, but your placement within the distribution. What was the max and the minimum amount that you saw? And like was there ever anywhere like you were sitting at the top of the range and then all of a sudden you were sitting like way below?
Mm-hmm.
Like even at like the 70 range, it's kind of on the low end for Alliance.
So just looking at like a few of these numbers in here in the sheet, like pod 14 or pool 14, if you picked one of 3, you'd have an 80 SAS, which is pretty good. That is
Yeah.
probably like top 10, top 5 percentile or better. Um,
Uh,
there were 24, about 30 decks that were 80 or better. So you were one of those 30. But if you played Alliance, you were the number one highest deck with your 96
Whoa.
SAS.
Okay.
okay, so
Yeah.
you're looking at the
But
raw data there. With the folks on stream don't have the benefit of it, I think. But yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I was just curious about that because like I feel like if you were doing a format and you opened a bundle of decks and like, if this was pick one of 3, I think I would have won this, but because it's Alliance, I don't have a chance. Like I wondered if there was any pod like bundles that we got that were like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting too to it'd be interesting too to talk about like, well, all right, I see where the mean is, right? I see that like 73 is average, say for Sealed Alliance, but like, do I have a threshold that I kind of have to reach to have a chance of going all the way? And that'd be really subjective, right?
Hmm.
Like okay, I can make a 75, but if I want to have like a board wipe in there, well, now I'm talking about a 67 or something. I don't know,
Yeah.
like making up numbers, right?
Yeah, like what concessions are you making for the format
Yeah.
versus just having a higher quality deck? Yeah.
And so interesting. And so yeah, and so totally I think about this more as like the overall quality of deck card quality in your deck that you could achieve absent other goals. Um, and
Mm.
we saw on the Nordic server, right, like uh, there was a lot of preference at play when folks were thinking about how to build alliances, right? I think Sizox gave folks like, all right, here's 9 pods, like which ones do you want to use? And it was like no pod got picked less than 3 times or something. Like people were all over the
Mm.
map. So it's a thing for sure. And then you can get into
Yeah.
like, well, yeah, is there a best deck in the pod? Like, no, probably not. There's like, and totally like the alliance thing will give you a chance to play something that's more your play style. And if that's
Yeah.
the goal, then like, okay, you may be succeeding at that goal.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. So I think what we should
This
do
is
for
episode
pick one
number
of
two.
three
Yeah.
this is episode
is
number 2. I just found some more really fascinating stuff. And as you guys are talking about this, I'm trying to think like, I added a column to the spreadsheet to do the diff of going from traditional to sealed alliance and like what are the biggest jumpers in there? And the biggest jumper was one deck was able to increase by 16 SAS points by making an alliance. They went from a 71 to an 88 or so. And then I scroll to the very bottom, And there are 10 very sad decks, 11 very sad decks, whose SAS actually got worse by making an alliance.
That's impossible.
I don't
Impossible.
think it is because of the different houses. And if you can't choose
Uh,
logos,
no.
Because it would just make an alliance of one deck.
Yeah, you just picked the one deck. There is something going on there. It could be. So this
I
is
think it might be a rounding error because it's like 0.0015.
okay.
So
If there's
probably a
rounding going on,
rounding
that's
error.
possible. Another thing that's possible, which I should double check on, is it's possible that I picked the SAS. No, never mind. It's rounding. I'll take a look at it. Forget, but
Yeah.
yeah.
There are a pretty significant number. So there's like 28 decks in total that are a zero change or
Mm,
less, meaning like
Mm.
you're probably taking the deck as is. 28 out of like 1,600 pools, 1,668 pools.
yeah.
There's a lot that, don't change by even like a tenth of a point.
I mean,
Crazy.
Like,
you expect, and if you were good at arithmetic on your feet, you could estimate how many you expect. But folks who just opened their best alliance decks naturally, right? Like that's going to happen for sure, and there's going to be no change in those numbers.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if we're gonna play a game,
We should do it.
to you guys, we should pick pool. I'll say one number and you say the other.
17.
34.
57.
Yeah, let's do that.
Wow.
Wait. We don't have the pools, do we? Like,
That's what I'm getting at. Do we have the pools? They're
Uh,
supporting data somehow.
We do
We can look it up.
somewhere. I don't know where it is.
Come on, I'm testing you.
I mean, those would be two pretty evenly matched decks, it looks like,
I can
just
get
by
on
a SAS score.
like a cut of it that still has all of the like IDs and stuff in. I think I pulled all that out before shuffling up the decks. Derp, 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 derp.
Derp derp.
Yeah, not on the spot. I like it's in a spreadsheet somewhere, but yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
shoot.
Shoot.
No
Well,
worries.
do we want to play a game or is it late? Do we want
That's a little.
You know what? I am supposed to maybe play against Hobo in the ABR match at some point. I could stream.
to? Why don't we
yeah,
just
you
let's just get Hobo on here and play a game against Hobo right
bring
now?
Hobo in. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
It may
I'll let
depend
you
on when
guys
he's
do that. I'm
available.
gonna take off.
Yeah, I may not stick for a game either, but B-Hawk, thanks again. Appreciate you
Yeah.
jumping on.
Thanks, guys, for having me. Have a good one.
Right
All right,
on.
see ya.
Thanks, Beahawk.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
I was only half kidding about getting Flaming Hobo in here right now. I could probably use an earlier bedtime tonight as well.
Yeah, we can call it there. I'll keep our powder dry. 3 versus Hobo. Brain versus left hand and right hand.
We don't want to give him an advantage in ABR.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we can call that there for the stream.
We'll play the Coda Sealed another time.
We owe y'all a Coda Sealed. Yeah, sorry for the late start time, but robbed you all of a game.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but Urchin's Cream is that what it was called?
Urchin's Itch Cream. Yeah.
Urchin's Itch Cream doesn't quite pay JT enough to not have another job. So
You know, it's the
someday,
truth.
though,
It's the truth.
someday Urchin's Itch Cream and Piranha Monkey clothing line will be enough for us to sustain ourselves. Not yet, though.
Nice. Just keeping you hanging, chat. You got to come back next time for the good stuff, you know. But yeah, thanks for hanging out, folks. Yeah, we'll see you around the sloppy lab. Bye, y'all.
Thanks, guys.